let's talk through the story of winning in Week 12 DFS. The story that begins with finding the best lineup through your preparation. Let me explain. We can start by looking at a player such as Juju Smith-Schuster at $5,700, who's expected to return from a concussion this week. Now, over Juju's last 6 healthy games, he's averaging over 8 targets per game and 16.1 fantasy points per game. Let me put this in perspective for you. That 16.1 points per game is top 12 amongst all receivers in the NFL, and he has massive upside because he's playing with Patrick Mahomes. So Juju in this price range, assuming he returns, is fantastic, but he's not the only guy I'm targeting in this mid-tier at wide receiver. It is the best spot for wide receiver this week, the mid-tier. $6,100 Keenan Allen also returned last week. Now, in his 2 previous games, he was injured. He re-injured himself when he tried to return earlier this year, but when he returned last week, he played 66% of the snaps and was reportedly limited, so this can increase, and on just 2/3 of the snaps, he saw 8 targets. Great usage. Now, this led to 12.5 fantasy points, and you could expect even more usage this week, plus Mike Williams is injured. So perhaps the key to this slate is the mid-range at wide receiver, but which quarterback are you pairing them with? Well, my favorite option is also the most expensive option at $8,200 because of those mid-range wide receivers, because of how affordable they are, especially Juju, Patrick Mahomes' teammate. Because as you can see in the corner over here, Mahomes has the highest team total on the slate at 29 and about a half points this week, and the dude is throwing 40 times per game, which just leads to massive upside for a 300-plus yard day. And he surprisingly has the stacking options. Yeah, Kelsey is expensive, but relative to the expensive wide receivers, he's actually cheap. And then we talked about how affordable Juju is. Guys like MVS are just $4,000, and even Sky Moore, who might start this week, is $3,000 flat. It is easy to build these Mahomes and Chiefs stacks. And if you need any more confidence, these are Mahomes' last 4 games, going over 27 points in each of them, and this doesn't even factor in the 300-plus yard bonus. He's basically gone over 30 in all these games. All right, so let's now attack the running back as we're starting to build out this lineup, or at least a player pool here, and we can look at a man coming off the bye week, $6,900 Kenneth Walker. In my opinion, he's in a dream spot. You see, Walker ranks top 10 this year in evaded tackles, but since he became the starter about a month ago or so when Rashad Penny got hurt, he's actually top 3 in broken tackles. Now, this is important because the team he's facing this week, the Las Vegas Raiders, rank 31st, second worst in the entire NFL in tackling. So for a man who's averaging 20.2 fantasy points per game as a starter and is below $7,000, yeah, this matchup is nice. So much so that I took Walker over 73.5 rushing yards over on prizepicks.com. You could take this one as well. You'll get a free bet when you use the link in the description or just code SAL22 on prizepicks.com. So now we have a really nice understanding of what a quality lineup can look like. Let's attack maybe a cheaper running back. And we go to the 5K range and we look at Antonio Gibson, who's just $5,400 this week off of 2 really nice performances. Because you see, over the last 2 weeks, he's had pretty favorable spots. In week 10 against Philadelphia, Washington had a clear game plan. They ran the ball 40 times. Yeah, that's going to help Gibson. And then in week 11, he plays a season high 66% of the snaps and faces the dead last ranked Texans run defense. Now, he'll face a better defense this week in Atlanta, but they're not elite. They're about middle of the pack. And more importantly, his usage in this game was elite. His season high 21 touches, over 100 total yards. JD McKissic is now out, so you can expect him to stay on the field longer, especially in passing downs. So I'm interested in Gibson at this price tag, and then I'm interested in this next tight end. And that would be David Njoku, who's just $3,600. And look, he made his return last week from injury, and he played 37% of the snaps. That ended up being 28 total snaps, whereas Harrison Bryant, the younger player, played 55. This is going to change as soon as this week as Njoku gets healthier. And on the season, Njoku is averaging 5.6 points per game, but that factors in the game that he left early with injury and last week when he was limited. When he's actually healthy this year, he's averaging 7.2 targets per game. To put this in perspective for you, he is a top 5 tight end in usage this season when he's actually out there healthy on the field. That's fantastic for this price tag. Okay, now I want to draw your attention back to that lovely mid-range of the wide receiver spot for the guy who I think is the best play at the position and perhaps on the entire slate, and it's Chris Godwin at just $6,000 flat. He is averaging 10.8 targets his last 5 games. And if you took my DFS course, you know the thing called the flat price principle. When you're $6,000 flat, $9,000 flat, whatever it is, it's assumed that there's not a discount. Psychologically, in the human brain, we will avoid that player more. Yes, this is a crazy thing. You can't avoid it on average, just that's the way your brain works. So because of this, guys like Juju who are cheaper will be viewed as a major discount for just $300, or even guys who are $100 cheaper over Godwin, even though he's the far superior play in my opinion. I have Godwin projecting out for around 80 receiving yards this week, so I smashed the over 65.5 receiving yards, and I want him in many of my lineups this week. Go ahead and take this prop as well if you indeed want to. Okay, more value wide receivers here. We kind of name dropped him a little earlier, but MVS, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, is only $4,000, and he is who he is. Look, over his last 6 games, in 3 of those games, he has 14 or more fantasy points. That easily pays off a 4K price tag. But the problem? In the other 3 games, he has 2.8 points, 2 points, and a big old 0 points. He is as boom or bust as it gets. But here's the thing. He's low owned, he's cheap, and he's a wide receiver out there for all the snaps with Patrick Mahomes and a 30-point team total. So the exact times to play him is when nobody else is and he's cheap, which is right now. So yeah, I like him this week. And I also like his teammate for even more value at $3,000. This is assuming Kadarius Toney is out. He left early in the last game with a hamstring injury, allowing Sky Moore to see his best usage of the season. You see, in this game, Sky Moore saw 5 catches, 63 yards, was used in crucial times in the 4th quarter, and he had a team high amongst the wide receivers, 6 targets last week. And he only ended up playing like 30% of the snaps. That's going to rise significantly if he starts for Toney in this one. So he earned the trust of Reed and Mahomes in crucial situations last week. And a reminder, this guy was able to average and earn over 11 targets per game in college. So he is a good receiver at getting open. So that's one way to play this slate, the Chiefs stack. There's some cheaper options, some nice running backs. Another way is to look at Tua, who's coming off the bye at just $6,900 because he also has an elite team total at 29 points. And more importantly, he's $1,300 less than Mahomes, and he has an elite matchup against the Texans, number 30 secondary. Again, he's coming off the bye. They've had 2 weeks to plan for this poor secondary. And you know his clear stacking options, as they've done 2 or 3 times this year, winning slates, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and if you really wanted to, you could throw a Gesicki in there for value. Now, if you go with this approach, you'll have some more money to spend that running back, so maybe you get up off of an Antonio Gibson and you go to $6,600 James Conner, who on Monday night was the clear and obvious main running back. I mean, this is crazy. He played 55 of a possible 56 snaps on Monday Night Football. He only left the field for 1 play. This is the best usage he has seen in his entire career. And even in a game where his team is getting blown out, he still showed up. 16 touches, he found the end zone, he got 13.4 points. In what is the worst situation, this is because he's game script independent. He has the receiving ability and the red zone role, the ultimate cheat codes for a fantasy running back. And I have even more good news for you. He's facing the Chargers, number 29 ranked run defense this week at just $6,600. He's a lovely play. Now, I get it. If you want to play Mahomes and maybe even the expensive wide receivers, a Travis Kelce who's expensive, well, you're going to need to find a cheap running back. So here's the cheapest one we've talked about today, $5,100 Rachaad White, who is reportedly, according to The Athletic and their beat reporter Greg Allman for Tampa Bay, he is believed to be the retaining starting running back for this week. And the last time we saw him before the bye, he had over 100 yards on 22 touches. He had a nice day. I believe Leonard Fournette is still going to be involved for sure. He's a veteran that they trust, but it's at least worth mentioning that these reports, we can't just blow them off, because the last time we saw White, he was good, and Fournette all year long has not been good. It'll really come down to if Brady trusts White in pass protection, which for many rookies is a shaky situation, but we know he could trust his hands. He had the 7th most running back catches last week. Now take on the brand new worst run defense in the league. Last week it was the Texans, but right now it's going to be the Cleveland Browns, ranking 32nd in the NFL, so it's the perfect time to play him at a cheap price point if you wanted to, and the Bucs are favorites. Now, another massively underpriced running back is the new cheapest guy we've talked about, $5,000 Latavius Murray, because Melvin Gordon was released and Chase Edmonds was just put on the IR. He's going to miss some weeks, which means the only remaining competition is Marlon Mack, the veteran, who doesn't have a single touch this year and only has 37 total touches since 2019. And then Mike Boone, who's been on the IR. He's eligible to return this week, but we haven't seen any news as of right now if that's going to be the case. Now, look, Latavius Murray isn't great. He ranks 54th amongst all running backs in yards per touch, so he's not that explosive. He's not breaking tackles all that much, but he's seeing opportunities. You see, last week alone, he saw 21 total touches, and the Broncos are actually favorites this week, meaning he'll probably see 16 plus touches again, maybe a couple of receptions in there like last week, so he has to be in play. I do think he'll pick up more ownership than a Rachaad White, so if you're looking for a sneaky pivot who has more explosiveness and just needs to earn more touches, that's the spot to go to. A potential tight end to target is $4,200 Tyler Higbee, who, look, he's likely to be a top 2 owned, if not the highest owned tight end on the slate, up there with Travis Kelce, because he's the perfect run back. He's cheap for your Kansas City stacks. And in his first game without Cooper Kupp, he looked good. He earned 8 targets. He didn't put up a massive day in the box score, 4 catches for 45 yards, but he was out there for an insane amount of the snaps, 92%, one of his best on the year, and now he has 16 targets over the last 2 games since Kupp has been injured. So Higbee is one way to go, but these cheaper tight ends, when they have a lot of ownership, there's just other guys in that range you can go to for like 3% owned instead of 15%. Perhaps you go to another Tyler for some leverage, and that's going to be Tyler Lockett. Compared to Keenan Allen, Chris Godwin, and even Juju, I think he'll be picking up relatively low ownership off the bye in a really nice matchup versus the Raiders' poor secondary. Now, if we look at his recent snap percentages right here, you can see the snaps have come up significantly. He's been playing before the bye week around 92% of the snaps. The problem is his volume was dropping to just 5 and 5. Now, this team wants to run the ball. They're not going to pass a lot, so him seeing 5 targets is still a large chunk of the target share. And he's producing, so he's out there, he's running routes. He can only see more targets now because this role is really good, so I think he's a nice play here against a 27th ranked secondary in Las Vegas. Now, this next guy is $5,200. He's the cheapest wide receiver we've talked about, not from the Chiefs so far, and I think Brandon Cooks is appealing because of the fact that he's a run back for these Miami stacks. Now, Cooks has 5+ targets in every single game this year, and he has 6 or more in every single game but one. The problem, though, is his quarterback Davis Mills has not been great. As you can see right here, just 73% of his targets are catchable, meaning 28%, nearly 1/3 of them are just pointless. They're not even worth even having a chance to catch. He is ranked 71st in target quality. That means his targets are not all that great based on where Davis Mills is putting them. Now, all of that we know, and we've been seeing that haunt him so far this season, but he's still the best option on this team if we're talking about a run back for stacks and high GPP upside. If you're not playing Miami stacks, then I probably don't play him, but the best spot to get some exposure is on Prize Picks. I took him over 55.5 receiving yards. I have him in the 60s here, and you can get this with a free bet up to $100. Again, when you use the code SAL22, SAL22 on prizepicks.com. Now, if you do want to play the Miami stacks, this is probably the best wide receiver to use. It is not Tyreek Hill due to his price tag. It is $7,300 Jalen Waddle. He's more affordable than Tyreek Hill, and with Waddle, you get 7.5 targets per game for just $7,300. And I mean, this dude's been great. He is top 5 right now in earning fantasy points against man coverage. He is top 10 in yards after the catch, so he knows how to earn targets. Think about it this way. This dude knows how to earn targets, and a lot of them, and then get yards after the catch. That is a deadly combo for production. So I'm a fan of Waddle this week, but maybe you want to go off the board with a quarterback. And believe it or not, Justin Herbert at $7,000 flat is a way to get off the board. For one, we talked about the flat price principle. That comes into play here. But number 2, he's only top 20 points twice this year. Now, one of those was last week against the Kansas City Chiefs. He has a nice team total at 26 points and a really nice matchup against the Cardinals' bottom 10 secondary. In last week against the Chiefs, he got his guy back. As you can see right here, he got Mr. Keenan Allen back, and he saw a season high 77% completion percentage, and that was with Keenan out there for just 2/3 of the snaps. Not only do the Chargers have a 26-point team total, but when you run it back with how many points the Cardinals are expected to score, it's the highest total on the week at 49 points. A nice game environment to target guys. I'll prefer the Chargers guys here. We're talking Austin Eckler, we're talking Keenan Allen with Herbert. All right, so back to affordable running backs here. You have $5,900 Jeff Wilson, who I think is a fantastic play this week. He'll be a nice pivot off of some of the higher owned Miami guys, and he is a great option. In 2 games as a Miami Dolphin, and one with a short week to learn the playbook, he's been a top 8 running back on the week in both games. And right before the bye week, he played 42 of 69 snaps. That's 60% of the snaps compared to Raheem Mostert, the clear backup, who played less than half of that at just 19 snaps. And he's now going to be facing the Texans, who rank 29th in run defense and have basically given it up on the ground every single week. I think Jeff Wilson is a nice play. He's seen 8 targets in 2 games with the Dolphins, so there's a little bit of a floor there in the receiving game as well. So that's one cheap running back option. We discussed the Rashad Whites of the world. We discussed the Latavius Murrays. I think Jeff Wilson's the best option out of all of them, but so is this next guy. And this next guy is interesting primarily because he'll probably be 1 or 2% owned. Those other guys will be like 5, maybe 10% owned. This guy will be 1 or 2% owned in a nice matchup, and it's Michael Carter, who's been seeing sneaky good usage. He ended up seeing 23 of 50 snaps in the last game, and they ran a very little amount of plays because this was just a running game against the Patriots. It was a gross game. Usually you'll play 10 to 15 more plays, and you'll see a lot more snaps. But the key here is that he played more than double the snaps as newly acquired James Robinson, which means he's probably the starter here. And if anything, Ty Johnson will probably lose some more snaps. Again, you're playing him because he's like 1 or 2% owned if you're trying to win a contest like the Millie Maker or a large field tournament. He plays the Bears, who rank 31st in run defense. And if the Jets were to make a switch to a guy like Joe Flacco, it becomes really interesting because Flacco checks it down a lot for a 10 target game to Carter. So we feel good about the value at running back. Let's attack more value at tight end. And Foster Moreau, the fact that he's this cheap is crazy. He's just $3,400, even though he's seeing elite usage. With Darren Waller injured, he's basically playing every snap, 100%, 98, 95, and then 100% last week. The problem is he saw just 3 targets in the last game, but when he's out there that often, once Devontae Adams stops seeing a 50% target share, he'll see 5 or 6 targets, and he has red zone usage. So at this price tag, he's sort of a sleeping giant. Now, speaking of potential sleeping giants, $5,800 Tom Brady off the bye week. This is an interesting spot. Now, they're facing the Browns' number 30 ranked defense. They can opt to just run the ball in this poor run defense, and that would hurt Brady's upside, but the Bucs never do that with Tom Brady. I mean, they're throwing 43 times per game this season, including games where they've had positive game scripts, and they could just run the ball. They're still throwing in the second half. Now, your concern is that Brady's averaging just 15.5 points per game, and he's only top 20 points one time this year. But if there was ever a week to attack this team, it would be off the bye week with an extra week to prep for a poor defense. My favorite stacking option with Brady would be Chris Godwin, and then after that, I'd be looking at Mr. Mike Evans. Now, we've talked about a lot of value running backs, but the pay-up running backs this week, like Christian McCaffrey at $8,800, I think he's a great play because people are concerned about Elijah Mitchell. But when you look at the underlying statistics here, Mitchell played 1/3 of the snaps as Christian McCaffrey. He played 25% of the snaps, so McCaffrey last week played a possible 38 of 51. That's 75% of the snaps. And sure, it only led to 7 rush attempts for McCaffrey when Elijah Mitchell saw 9, but that's not the reason we want to play him. We want to play him because he's used strategically in the passing game, where he caught all 7 of his targets and still went for 100 total yards last week. He also didn't play most of the fourth quarter when the game was blown out on Monday night, so he probably would have seen even more touches, around 18 or so in that game, maybe even up to 20, which is his normal role. Reminder, he just went for 40 plus points about a month ago. Now here's an interesting value wide receiver for you at $4,200, Treylon Burks, who just broke out in his last game. On Thursday night against the Packers last week, he earned a team high 8 targets. He was targeted on 38% of his routes, which for comparison, anything above 30 is elite. Devontae Adams sees like 35%. And he had his first 100+ yard game. He did all this while playing just 50% of the snaps as he still worked his way back from injury. Expect even more usage this week. And if we're talking about just skill set, he beat veteran cornerbacks like Jair Alexander, one of the best in the league, on the outside for the kill shot late in that game. This dude is fast and he has skills. A player who has skills, and he definitely had major skills at one point, has regressed a little bit as he ages, as most guys do, is Allen Robinson at $5,500. He's another Kansas City run back option. I'm not dying to get to this guy, but let's look at what he did in his first game without Cooper Kupp last week. He ended up playing 84% of the snaps. He saw 5 targets and he found the end zone. The end zone saved him. Otherwise, he would have just had a 4 catch for 47-yard day. Look, Robinson is not great. He's literally averaging just 1 yard per route run. We want this number closer to 2, which ranks 87th in the NFL right now. It's terrible. He's basically a wide receiver 3 in the NFL and some of the worst usage. He's only in there in stack run backs, and he likely needs a touchdown for to pay off for you here. And obviously check the status of Matt Stafford as the week goes on. If he's out, I don't want anything to do with this guy. Now, a guy that I do have a lot of exposure to is DK Metcalf at $6,500. I like him more than his teammate we talked about earlier in Tyler Lockett. I think he is a fantastic play. I assume he picks up ownership in this range, but I still want him. He has a major size advantage, 25 plus pounds on all of these Raiders cornerbacks. And now in 2 games since returning from his injury that people thought would make him miss a month, didn't miss any time. He has 13.9 fantasy points and 7.5 targets per game. And now he had the bye week to just get back to full health. I like DK in this matchup a ton. I like him over 63.5 receiving yards. Again, you get a free bet when you use the code SAL22 on Prize Picks. I think this is the best one we've talked about yet. And speaking of players coming off of this bye week, this next running back is fantastic. He is way too cheap, $6,700 Travis Etienne, who, look, he's played 75% or more snaps in every single game as a starter. And his last time out before the bye, he didn't play well, 10.3 points, but this was because his team in Jacksonville was getting blowed out by Kansas City. That's why he only saw 11 rushing attempts. Compared to the 20 plus opportunities he was seeing in previous games, you can expect closer to that in this matchup against Baltimore. And we've sort of buried the lead on the best tight end, but $7,700 Travis Kelce, you will think he's expensive, but he is far too cheap compared to other wide receiver ones who are in the 8 and 9K range. This man is averaging a career high 22 points per game, setting records this year. He should be, based on this usage, $8,500 to $9,000. He is too cheap. The upside is massive. You already know that. He leads the NFL amongst all positions, including receiver, with 22 red zone targets. And the craziest thing is that he has the most tight end targets while still being the most efficient tight end. The way math works is the more volume you see, the less efficient you become over time. Not for Travis Kelce. So yes, play him with Patrick Mahomes and just make the rest of it work out for you. Now, if you want to see the exact players that are optimal because of their lower ownership and their high values and a whole lot more, including our Sunday How to Win a GPP strategy show exclusive only to the DFS Blueprint on Patreon, you can check it out with the thousands of other people in the community linked down below.